"You're in the wrong room, sweetheart," one lieutenant snickered as I stepped into the Top Gun briefing. "Only real pilots here." Secretaries wait outside. The others burst out laughing. Then the instructor entered, spotted me, and saluted. "Welcome back, Phoenix 1. Every face in the room turned ghost white. Have you ever been so utterly dismissed, so arrogantly brushed aside, only to watch their faces drain of all color as your past and your true identity walks back into the room? Because that happened to me, and the satisfaction was unforgettable. I'm Commander Elise Rogers, 38 years old. And I've earned every single stripe, every single bit of respect, by flying through fire at 30,000 feet and still bringing the jet home. For years, I poured everything I had into the Navy, my time, my health, my peace. I trained younger pilots, I covered their mistakes, and I proved over and over that I belonged in a world that often didn't want me to. But that Tuesday, when I walked into a Top Gun briefing and heard some hotshot lieutenant tell me I was in the wrong room, sweetheart, something inside me just shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just waited. I waited until Captain Walker, the lead instructor, walked in, saw me, and gave me a crisp, formal salute. "Good to have you back, Phoenix 1. The look on that lieutenant's face? Priceless. It was 1,400 hours, a Tuesday. The Nevada sun was a brutal white outside, baking the tarmac, but inside, the air conditioning hummed, a small mercy. I was in my standard Navy flight khakis, sleeves rolled exactly to regulation, hair pulled back tight. No name tape on this uniform yet, it was brand new from check-in. I carried my tablet and a cup of that industrial-strength coffee you learn to drink black after enough years at sea. The room was already buzzing. A sea of young faces, all men, all radiating that fighter pilot swagger, flight suits unzipped just enough to show off t-shirts. They stood in clusters, hands slicing through the air, tracing imaginary dogfights. Their voices were just loud enough, a subtle boast. I knew the type. I'd flown with versions of them for 15 years. I just slipped into the back row, set my coffee down, and opened my tablet. Behind me, a low mutter. A brief, smug laugh. I didn't flinch. There was a time, early in my career, when I would have bristled. I would have needed to know what they said, felt compelled to respond, to defend, to prove something. But I'd learned. The best response to men who underestimate you is to let them keep doing it. Until the moment it costs them. The briefing was set for 14:30. At 14:28, a lieutenant, dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, walked past my row. He stopped. Backtracked. Helmet bag slung over his shoulder, a call sign patch I couldn't quite read. He looked at me, then at the room number on the wall, then back at me. "You're in the wrong room, sweetheart," he said. His voice wasn't hostile, not exactly. Just confidently corrective, like he was redirecting a lost tourist. "Real pilots only. Secretaries sit outside." The conversations around us died. Heads turned. I looked up at him. Let the silence stretch, just long enough to be excruciating. I was about to speak, when the door at the front of the room swung open. Captain David Walker entered. Shoulders back, eyes sweeping the room with that innate situational awareness you can't teach. He was older, grayer at the temples than when I'd last seen him, but he moved with the same unshakable calm that had kept our squadron alive over the Persian Gulf, back when I was 27 and everything around us was on fire. He stopped mid-stride. His eyes found me. His entire posture shifted, not relaxed, but sharp, formal. He came to attention. And saluted. "Good to have you back, Phoenix 1, he said. His voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. I returned the salute, crisp and deliberate, exactly the way he'd taught me a decade ago when I was a nugget pilot, fumbling carrier landings in a crosswind. Every man in that room was utterly still. The lieutenant who'd called me sweetheart, his name was Cruz, I'd learn later, had taken 2 steps back. His face cycled through confusion, then recognition, then something that looked a lot like sheer panic. "Good to be back, sir," I said. Captain Walker moved to the podium. "Gentlemen," he began, not looking at them, just queuing up slides. "Let me introduce Commander Elise Rogers. Some of you may know her call sign, Phoenix 1. He paused. "She earned it during Operation Enduring Freedom. Her F/A-18 took battle damage over Kandahar. Hydraulic failure, electrical fire, and she still put her ordnance on target before recovering to the carrier. He continued, listing off squadrons she'd commanded, deployments, medals, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with Valor. She's here as a candidate evaluator for this selection cycle. He finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over the pale faces in the room. And she's senior to every person here, except me. I watched their faces. Some tried to hide it. Others didn't bother. Cruz, the sweetheart lieutenant, had gone utterly pale. Another, younger, with freckles, stared at his boots. A third, near the front, met my eyes for half a second before looking away. I knew exactly what was happening in their heads. They were recalculating, running through everything they'd said, everything they'd assumed in the past 20 minutes, wondering what it would cost them. Walker started the actual briefing. Technical, focused, the usual rundown for the Naval Fighter Weapons School, Top Gun, though no one officially called it that anymore. I took notes, asked 2 clarifying questions, and otherwise stayed quiet. When he dismissed them, the pilots filed out in silence. Cruz lingered near the door, like he wanted to speak, but I didn't give him an opening. I gathered my materials and walked to the front. "You didn't have to do that," I told Walker when we were alone. "Do what?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "The introduction. They would have figured it out eventually." Eventually isn't the same as immediately. And you've outranked most of the instructors here, too. They needed to know. "I don't need you to fight my battles, David." "I'm not fighting your battles," he said, closing his laptop. "I'm preventing a bunch of junior officers from ending their careers before they start. You've been gone 3 years. Things haven't changed as much as they should have." He was right. I'd been overseas, flying missions where rank mattered more than gender because everyone was too tired to care about anything but getting home alive. Coming back stateside felt like stepping backward in time. "How long are you here?" he asked. 6 months, maybe longer, depending on the assignment after this. "Thinking about staying past 20. "I don't know yet," I said, picking up my empty coffee cup. "Depends on whether I still like the job when I'm not dodging surface-to-air missiles." He laughed. "Fair enough. Listen, Rogers. I'm glad you're here. We need people like you in the schoolhouse. People who've actually done the job under fire." "You mean women?" "I mean pilots who know what the hell they're doing and can teach these kids how not to die." He paused, then added, "But yeah, women too. It matters that they see you here, whether they know it yet or not." I left the building 20 minutes later, walking across the base toward the BOQ where I was staying. The sun was lower, the air still hot but losing its edge. I passed the flight line, rows of F divided by a -18S, wings folded, canopies glinting. Half my adult life had been spent strapped into an ejection seat, a helmet on, the ocean 5 miles below. It was the only place I'd ever felt completely sure of myself, free of doubt. On the ground, everything was complicated. In the air, it was simple: fly the aircraft, complete the mission, bring everyone home. I thought about Cruz's comment, "Secretaries sit outside," and felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication, not even satisfaction. Just a kind of tired familiarity. I'd heard versions of that line 100 times over the years. You get used to it, or you don't. And if you don't, you leave. I'd stayed because I was good at the job. Because leaving would have meant letting people like him win by default. But some days, I wondered what it would have been like to choose a career where competence was assumed instead of constantly tested. My phone buzzed, a text from Walker. "Drinks later if you want to catch up properly." I sent back a thumbs-up emoji and kept walking. The air smelled like jet fuel and dust, familiar and clean in a way that made sense to me. Somewhere, an engine spooled up for a test run, the sound rising and falling like breathing. I'd be back in a cockpit in 2 days for my requalification flights. Until then, I had paperwork, briefs, and a room full of young pilots who were just beginning to understand that the person they'd underestimated was about to evaluate whether they were good enough to be there at all. The word spread faster than I expected. By the next morning, everyone on base seemed to know who I was. I walked into the operations building at 0700, and the senior chief at the desk stood up, greeting me by rank and name. In the hallway, a group of junior officers stepped aside, one of them nodding with a tight, respectful expression. On the flight line, the crew chief, Marcus Hale, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, saluted. "Honored to have you flying my bird, ma'am." I stopped, surprised. "You know who I am?" "Everyone knows who you are, Commander. Phoenix 1. We read about you in the maintenance logs from Truman. That fire you brought back? We used that as a case study for damage assessment training." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "Let's make sure this one doesn't catch fire." He grinned. "Roger that, ma'am." The pilots were harder to read. Some avoided me entirely, changing direction in the hallway or suddenly finding something fascinating to look at. Others made a point of introducing themselves, shaking my hand, welcoming me with a formality that felt almost offensive. They were trying to prove they weren't like the others. A few, mostly the older instructors who'd seen the culture shift over decades, treated me exactly the way they treated everyone else. That was the only reaction I actually wanted. Cruz, the lieutenant who told me secretaries sit outside, didn't approach me for 3 days. On the 4th, I saw him in the hangar, inspecting his aircraft. I was walking past with my helmet bag, heading to my own jet, and he caught sight of me. He froze. For a second, I thought he'd pretend not to see me. Then he set down his checklist and walked over. "Commander Rogers," he said, his voice steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I owe you an apology." I stopped. "Go ahead." What I said in the briefing room was out of line. I didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. I made an assumption based on. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Based on things that had nothing to do with your qualifications or your presence there. It was disrespectful and unprofessional." "I'm sorry." I studied him. He met my eyes, didn't look away. That counted for something. "Apology accepted," I said. "But understand this, Lieutenant. The problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem was that you assumed someone didn't belong based on how they looked. That's the part you need to fix." "Yes, ma'am." "Are you a good pilot?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Yes, ma'am." "I think so." "Then prove it in the air. That's where it matters." I walked away before he could respond. I didn't need his gratitude or further apologies. I needed him to be better. And words weren't going to accomplish that. Only performance would. The simulator hop happened that Friday. Basic tactical intercept, 2 fighters against 4 adversaries, low altitude, compressed timeline. I volunteered to lead, running the tactical decisions while my wingman executed my directions. Cruz was assigned as my wingman. I didn't ask if it was intentional. I didn't care. We briefed for 30 minutes. Roles, responsibilities, comms, decision-making. Cruz took notes, asked good questions, stayed professional. In the simulator, he was slower than I expected. Not incompetent, his hands knew the aircraft. His radar work was solid, but he was thinking too much. Second-guessing his instincts, trying to fly perfectly instead of effectively. I called the initial merge, directed him to take the trailing bandit while I engaged the lead. He acknowledged, maneuvered, but hesitated on the trigger. By the time he fired, his target had defensive advantages. He ended up in a protracted engagement that burned fuel and time. I took my target, then had to support him, killing his bandit for him because he'd lost the initiative. We reset. Ran it again. Same result. The 3rd time, I let him fail completely. Didn't bail him out, just watched his simulated aircraft get shot down while I handled the other 3 bandits alone. When we debriefed, my voice was level, factual. "You're overthinking," I said. "You've got the skills, but you're not trusting them. You're flying like you're afraid to make a mistake." "I am afraid to make a mistake," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Especially now. Especially with you." "Why?" Because of who you are, your reputation. I don't want to look incompetent." "Then stop trying not to look incompetent and start trying to be good. There's a difference." I leaned back. When you're in a merge, you don't have time to think about how you look. You have time to decide, execute, and adapt. That's it. Everything else is noise. How do you turn off the noise? You don't. You just get louder than it is. I stood up. "We're flying again on Monday. Same scenario. This time, I want you to make decisions fast and live with the consequences. I'd rather see you fail decisively than succeed hesitantly. He nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. On Monday, he was better. Not perfect, he still hesitated once, still second-guessed a targeting call, but he was faster, sharper, more aggressive. When I directed him to engage, he committed fully, drove his bandit defensive, and killed him clean. We won the scenario with fuel to spare. In the debrief, I told him he'd done well, pointed out 2 mistakes he needed to correct, and moved on. He looked relieved, like he'd been holding his breath for 3 days. After that, something shifted. Not just with Cruz, but with the other pilots. They started asking me questions, technical ones about weapons employment, tactical ones about decision-making under pressure. In the ready room, they stopped going quiet when I walked in. On the flight line, they treated me like what I was, an experienced pilot who'd done the job and lived to teach it. I didn't soften my feedback. I didn't lower my standards. When someone flew poorly, I told them. When someone made a dangerous decision, I explained why it would get them killed in combat. But I also recognized good work. And I made a point of telling them when they'd done something right. Respect in aviation is earned through consistency, competence, and fairness. You can't fake any of those things. You can't demand them. You just have to be worth following. By the end of the second month, Cruz had improved significantly. He was flying with confidence, making decisions faster, his tactical awareness sharpened to where he was competitive with the top pilots in his class. After one particularly challenging sortie, he stayed behind after the others left. "Commander," he said, "I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me after the way I started." "I didn't do any favors, Lieutenant. You did the work." "Still, it means something." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something? How do you deal with it? The people who don't take you seriously? The ones who assume you're not as good because you're different?" I thought about that for a moment. "I don't deal with them," I said. "I outlast them. I outfly them. And eventually, they either figure it out or they wash out. Either way, it's not my problem to solve. It's theirs." He nodded, processing that. "That sounds lonely." "It is," I said. "But being good at something difficult is always lonely. That's not unique to me." I picked up my notes, heading for the door. Then I stopped. Turned back. "Cruz, you asked how I deal with people who underestimate me. Here's the real answer. I stopped caring what they think and started caring whether I'm right. When you're in the cockpit, nobody's opinion matters except yours and your wingman's. Everything else is just static. Learn to tune it out." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. I thought about that conversation often. About the cost of this job. The weight of carrying other people's lives in your hands every time you strap into a cockpit. It never got lighter. You just got stronger. In December, we flew a large force exercise, 8 aircraft, multiple target sets, complex threat environments. I led one of the divisions with Cruz as my wingman. The mission went better than I expected. Cruz flew solid wing, executed every directive. When simulated surface-to-air threats activated, he kept his composure, employed countermeasures correctly, and stayed offensive. We put all our ordnance on target, egressed clean, recovered to base. In the debrief, I highlighted his performance. Afterward, walking back to the building, he asked, "Commander, when you were flying combat, real combat, were you ever scared?" I stopped. Looked at him. "Every single time. But you didn't show it. Showing it doesn't help anyone. But yeah, I was scared. Fear is not the problem. The problem is letting it make your decisions for you." He thought about that. "How do you keep it from taking over?" "You focus on the task. You trust your training. And you remember that your wingman is depending on you to do your job, the same way you're depending on them. That's bigger than fear." "Did you ever lose anyone? Someone you were flying with?" I didn't answer right away. The question had weight. "Yes," I said finally. "Twice. Both times in combat. Both times there was nothing I could have done differently. That doesn't make it easier, but it's the truth." "Do you still think about them?" "Every day." We walked the rest of the way in silence. 3 months into my assignment at Fallon, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of normalcy. Not comfort, exactly. This job was never comfortable, but a rhythm, a pattern to the days that made sense. Morning briefs, simulator hops, flight ops, debriefs. I'd eat dinner at the officers' club or cook simple meals in my temporary quarters. I'd call my mother once a week, exchanging emails with old squadron mates. Walker and I fell into a routine of coffee on Friday mornings, talking through the week's challenges. He valued my input in a way that felt genuine. When I disagreed, he listened. When I was wrong, he explained why without condescension. One Friday, he asked, "How are you really doing?" Not professionally. "I'm fine," I said automatically. That's not what I asked. I looked out the window at the flight line. I don't know how to answer that anymore, David. I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't know who I am when I'm not doing it. That's not uncommon. I know. But it feels like it should be. I see these young pilots, crews, and the others, and they have lives outside the squadron. Relationships, hobbies, plans for after they get out. I don't have any of that. I have this job and a handful of people I used to deploy with who I barely talk to anymore. Do you regret it? No. But I wonder sometimes what it cost me. He was quiet for a moment. You know what the hardest part of this job is? It's not the flying. It's not the danger. It's the fact that you give everything to it, and at the end, it just moves on without you. You retire or you transfer, and a week later someone else is sitting in your seat, and the squadron keeps going like you were never there. That's bleak. It's honest, he said. But here's the other side of it. The pilots you train, the ones you teach how to survive, they carry you with them. Maybe they don't remember your name in 20 years, but they remember what you taught them. And if that saves their life, or their wingman's life, then it mattered. You mattered. I didn't have a response to that. It felt true and inadequate at the same time, like most truths about military service. Lieutenant Erin Moore was the only other woman in the training cycle. Quiet and competent. We hadn't really talked until one afternoon she knocked on my office door. "Commander, I wanted to ask your advice about something." "Go ahead." "There's an instructor here. He's been making comments. Nothing overtly hostile, just small things. Jokes about women pilots, suggestions I'm only here because of diversity quotas, comments about my appearance. It's not constant, but it's enough that I'm always aware of it." A familiar tightness formed in my chest. "Have you documented it?" "No. I don't know if I should. I don't want to be the woman who can't take a joke. I don't want to make it into a bigger thing than it is. Moore, listen to me. If someone is making you uncomfortable, that's already a big thing. You're not overreacting by acknowledging it. But what if I report it and nothing happens? Or worse, what if it makes me a target? I've seen how that goes. The woman who complains gets labeled difficult, emotional, unable to handle the culture. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to promise her that if she reported it, the system would protect her. But I'd been in the Navy long enough to know that wasn't always true. "Here's what I can tell you," I said. "You have 3 options. 1. Document everything and report it through official channels. That's the right answer, and sometimes it works. 2. Handle it directly. Confront the instructor. Tell him the behavior is unacceptable and make it clear that if it continues, you will report it. 3. Ignore it and focus on flying better than everyone else. Which is what I did for most of my career. Which one do you recommend? Honestly, I don't know anymore. I used to think option 3 was the only viable choice. Now, I'm not sure that was right. I survived, but I shouldn't have had to survive. None of you should." She nodded slowly. "What would you do now?" "I'd confront him directly. I'd tell him his comments are unprofessional and unwelcome, and I'd make sure there was a witness. And if it continued, I'd document and report. But that's me, at this point in my career, with this rank, this reputation. You have to make the choice that you can live with." "Thank you, ma'am," she said quietly. She left, and I sat there, staring at my desk, feeling the weight of a conversation I'd had versions of a dozen times. The advice was sound, but it felt insufficient. The fact that she had to calculate the risk of reporting harassment, had to weigh her career against her dignity, was an indictment of a system that claimed to value integrity above all else. 2 weeks later, I heard through Walker that Moore had confronted the instructor and the behavior had stopped. I didn't ask for details. I was just glad she'd found a path forward that worked for her. In January, crews deployed to the Western Pacific. A week later, I got an email from him. Brief, professional, thanking me for the training. 2 months after that, another message, longer, from a ship-based email account. Commander Rogers, I wanted to tell you something that happened yesterday. We were flying a mission. At one point, my flight lead got task-saturated, started making decisions too slowly, and I had to step up and take tactical control of our section. I remembered what you told me, make decisions fast and live with the consequences. So I did. I called the shot, repositioned our element, and we completed the objective without incident. Afterward, my flight lead thanked me, said I'd kept him from making a mistake that could have compromised the mission. And I realized that I'd finally stopped flying scared. I was flying like you taught me. Trusting my training, trusting my instincts, focusing on the task instead of worrying about how I looked doing it. I know I gave you every reason not to invest time in me after what I said at that first briefing, but you did anyway. And it made the difference between me being an adequate pilot and being a good one. So, thank you, not just for the tactical instruction, but for showing me what it actually means to be professional. Respectfully, James Vector Cruz. I read it 3 times. Saved it. Closed my laptop. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything I needed to say that he didn't already understand. He'd done the work. He'd become the pilot he was capable of being. That was the only response that mattered. 6 months into my Pentagon assignment, the Chief of Naval Personnel's office wanted to discuss my future. Command opportunities, promotion to captain. It was a big deal. The kind of meeting that could determine the next 5 years of my life. I prepared for it like a check ride. Asked if I was interested in Major Command, an aircraft carrier, an air wing. I said yes. They asked if I was willing to accept another staff tour before that. I said yes again. Afterward, walking through the Pentagon corridors, I felt a strange sense of disconnection. Like I was moving through someone else's life. This was the path I'd chosen, or the path that had chosen me. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a role, a script I was following because I didn't know how to write a different one. I called Walker that night. You ever feel like you're doing everything right, but none of it means anything anymore? Every day, he said. That's why I stayed at Fallon as long as I could. Once you leave the operational world, it's all just abstractions. Important abstractions. But still, how do you deal with it? I remind myself that someone has to do this job, and it might as well be someone who actually understands what the fleet needs. That helps sometimes. Other times, I just drink bourbon and watch baseball. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. That's your professional advice? That's my honest advice. The professional version is, you find meaning where you can, and you trust that the work matters, even when it doesn't feel like it does. That's bleak. It's the military, Elise. We don't do this job because it's easy or because it always feels meaningful. We do it because it has to be done. I sat with that for a while. He wasn't wrong. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that I'd given so much to this career, years, relationships, parts of myself I couldn't get back. And I wasn't sure what I'd gotten in return. Rank, respect, a call sign people recognized. But also loneliness, exhaustion, and a growing sense that I'd optimized my life for a mission that might not ever feel complete. In November, I received the message, selected for Major Command. Commanding Officer, Naval Air Station Oceana. One of the largest naval air stations on the East Coast. A significant assignment, positioning me for captain, potentially flag rank. I should have been excited. This was what I'd worked for. But when I read it, all I felt was tired. I accepted. Because that's what you did. Before transferring, I took 2 weeks of leave and flew to Arizona to see my mother. She was 70, still sharp, active. We spent days hiking, cooking, talking about everything except the Navy. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in years. One evening, watching the sunset from her patio, she asked, "Are you happy?" "I'm successful," I said. "That's not what I asked." The sky was turning purple and orange. "I don't know, Mom. I've spent my whole life trying to be good at this job, and I am good at it. But I'm not sure that's the same thing as being happy." "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because it's what I know. Because I've invested too much to walk away now. Because I don't know who I am if I'm not doing this. She was quiet. Your father used to say something similar. He loved the Marines, gave them everything he had, but at the end, he wished he'd spent more time with us. I don't want that for you, Elise. I want you to have a life outside of all this. I have a life. Do you? Or do you have a career that takes up all the space where a life should be? I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence, watching the stars come out. I thought about all the things I'd sacrificed without really choosing to. Relationships. Stability. The possibility of something beyond the Navy. I'd always told myself it was worth it. That the mission mattered more than personal comfort. But sitting there with my mother, I wasn't sure anymore. I took command of Oceana in January. The job was consuming. 12-hour days, sometimes longer, managing operations, personnel, budgets. Important work, necessary work, but relentless. I flew occasionally, proficiency hops, but it wasn't the same. I was the commanding officer now, always thinking about risk, liability, appearances. The freedom I'd felt as a younger pilot, the pure joy of flight, had been replaced by caution and calculation. 6 months in, I got the news. Captain David Walker had retired. I knew it was coming, but seeing the official message still hit me harder than I expected. He'd been a constant presence, a mentor, a friend. Now he was gone, living civilian life. I sent him an email. He replied a week later. He'd taken a job as a flight instructor at a civilian school in Colorado, teaching people to fly small aircraft for fun. The message was brief, but I could sense the contentment. The relief of stepping away from the bureaucracy and getting back to the simple act of flying. I was happy for him. I was also envious, in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. Then, an email in September, 3 years after I'd left Fallon. Request for guest lecture, Top Gun. They wanted me to speak at a leadership symposium. The topic, leading in high-performance environments. I stared at the email. Fallon. The place where I'd spent 6 months teaching, mentoring, rediscovering what I loved about this job. The place where I'd felt like I was making a tangible difference instead of shuffling paperwork. I accepted. I arrived at Fallon 2 days before the symposium. The base looked the same. The flat desert, the aircraft on the flight line, the mountains in the distance. I checked into the BOQ and that evening I just walked. Remembering what it had felt like to be here, to have a clear purpose every single day. The next morning, I ran into Chief Marcus Hale on the flight line. Commander Rogers, good to see you, ma'am. You here for the symposium? I am. Have you been, Chief? Can't complain. Still keeping these birds flying. Heard you're running Oceana now. That's a big job. It is. You miss flying every day? He nodded knowingly. That's the trade-off, isn't it? The higher you go, the further you get from the cockpit. Yeah, I said. It is. The symposium was in the main auditorium, about 60 pilots. Current students, recent graduates, senior instructors. I sat through the morning sessions, listening to speakers. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, looked out at the audience, and felt a strange calm. This was familiar territory. Not the speaking, that was always uncomfortable, but the audience. These were pilots. People who understood the job. I didn't have to explain myself. I'm Commander Elise Rogers, I began. Call sign Phoenix 1. Some of you might know that story. Some of you might not. Either way, I'm not here to talk about my combat record. I'm here to talk about something harder. What it means to lead when you're not sure you have anything left to give. A few people sat up straighter. I had their full attention. I've been in the Navy for 20 years, I continued. I've flown combat missions, commanded a squadron, taught at this school, and now I run an air station. And I'm going to tell you something nobody says at these events. Most days, I'm not sure any of it was worth it. Silence in the room. Deep, heavy. I'm not saying I regret my choices. I'm saying there's a cost to this career that nobody warns you about. You give everything to the mission, your time, your relationships, your sense of who you are outside of this uniform. And the mission takes it, gratefully, without hesitation. And at some point, you look up and realize you've optimized your entire life for something that will replace you the moment you're gone. I paused. Let that sit. So why do we do it? Why do we keep showing up? Keep flying? Keep leading? even when it's hard and lonely and exhausting, because someone has to, because the mission matters, even if it doesn't always feel like it does, and because the people you fly with, the people you lead, they're worth it. They're worth the sacrifice, the exhaustion, the loneliness. I looked around the room at young faces, older faces. When I was here 3 years ago, I taught a lieutenant who made a mistake, a bad one. He underestimated me, disrespected me, and had to learn the hard way that assumptions are dangerous. But he learned. And now he's deployed, flying combat missions. And he's good at it. And that matters more than the mistake he made. That's what leadership is, giving people the chance to be better than they were yesterday, even when they don't deserve it. I wrapped up, thanked them, and stepped down. The applause was polite, but genuine. Afterward, several pilots came up to talk. One was a young woman, a lieutenant, who thanked me for being honest about the cost of the career. "It helps to know I'm not the only one who feels this way sometimes," she said. "You're not," I told her. "And that's okay. Feeling it doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're human." On my last morning at Fallon, I requested a solo flight. A simple proficiency hop. Nothing tactical. Just me and an F/A-18 and an hour of airspace. They approved it without hesitation. I walked to the aircraft, did my pre-flight, climbed into the cockpit. Chief Hale was there, running final checks. "Good luck, ma'am," he said. "Thanks, Chief." I started the engines, ran the checklists, taxied to the runway. Tower cleared me for takeoff, and I advanced the throttles. Felt the aircraft accelerate. Felt the nose lift. Felt the wheels leave the ground. And for the first time in months, I felt free. I climbed to 20,000 feet, leveled off, and flew lazy circles over the desert. No mission, no timeline, no pressure. Just flight. The sky was clear, visibility unlimited. For 30 minutes, I didn't have to think about command or responsibility or the cost of this career. I just flew. When I landed, I shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit for a minute, helmet still on, hands resting on my thighs. I thought about Walker's email, about his contentment. I thought about my mother's question, "Are you happy?" And I realized I didn't have a good answer. But I also realized that maybe happiness wasn't the right metric. Maybe what mattered was whether the work had meaning, whether it made a difference, whether it was worth showing up for, even on the hard days. And by that measure, I was doing okay. I climbed out, grabbed my helmet bag, and walked back to the operations building. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Oceania. Back to the job, back to the relentless grind of command. But today, I'd done something I loved, in a place that felt like home. And that was enough. 1 year later, I stood in front of a different briefing room. Same base, same building. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a student or an evaluator. The nameplate beside the door read, "Commander Elise Rogers, Lead Instructor, Advanced Tactics. Division, Naval Fighter Weapons School." I'd submitted my resignation from command at Oceania 6 months earlier. The conversation with the detailer had been brief, professional. They'd asked if I was sure. I'd said yes. They'd asked where I wanted to go. I'd said Fallon. There had been a pause. "Then, we can make that happen." And they had. I wasn't running an air station anymore. I wasn't managing thousands of people or sitting in budget meetings. I was teaching pilots how to fly, how to fight, how to survive. It was a step backward in terms of career progression. Everyone knew that taking an instructor billet after major command meant you were off the flag officer track. But I didn't care. I was flying 3 times a week, debriefing tactics every afternoon, and going home to a small house off base where I'd finally unpacked all my boxes and hung pictures on the walls. My mother had visited last month. She'd looked around the house, at the furniture I'd chosen, the books on the shelves, the running shoes by the door, and said, "You look different." Different how? Lighter. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore. She was right. I'd spent 20 years carrying the weight of proving myself, of being excellent, of never giving anyone a reason to doubt I belonged. And somewhere in the past year, I'd set that weight down. Not because I'd proven anything, but because I'd stopped needing to. The door opened. The new class filed in 22 pilots this cycle, 2 of them women. They found their seats, opened their tablets, settled into that focused quiet that preceded every brief. I recognized the energy in the room, anticipation, confidence, the unspoken question of whether they were good enough to be here. I waited until they were all seated, then walked to the front. No introduction necessary. By now, most of them knew who I was before they arrived. Not from that first briefing 3 years ago. That story had faded into squadron lore, embellished and distorted. But from their own research, their own instructors, the reputation I'd built over 2 decades of flying. "Welcome to Advanced Tactics," I said. "I'm Commander Rogers. For the next 8 weeks, we're going to teach you how to think like an adversary, how to exploit weaknesses in defensive systems, and how to lead a strike package into contested airspace and bring everyone home. Some of you will struggle. Some of you will fail. That's not a threat. It's a statistical reality. This course has a 30% attrition rate, and we're not interested in lowering it." I pulled up the first slide, a tactical scenario. "Let's start with a simple question," I continued. "You're the mission commander. Your package is 20 miles from the target, and your electronic warfare aircraft reports a radar system that wasn't in the intelligence brief. What do you do?" Hands went up. I pointed to a lieutenant in the front row, sharp eyes, a call sign stitched on his flight suit. "Blade. Abort the mission, ma'am. If the threat picture doesn't match the brief, we don't have valid ROE to continue." "That's one answer," I said. "Anyone else?" A woman in the third row raised her hand. Lieutenant junior grade, looked young, couldn't be more than 26. Her name tape read, Santos. "Adapt the plan, ma'am. Reroute around the threat. Compress the timeline and prosecute the target from a different axis." "Better," I said. "But you're still assuming the new radar is the only change. What if there are more surprises waiting? What if your intelligence was compromised from the start?" Silence. They were thinking now, recalculating their assumptions. "The right answer," I said, "is that there is no right answer. There's only the decision you make with the information you have and the consequences you live with afterward. Mission command isn't about being perfect. It's about being decisive when perfect isn't an option." I ran them through the scenario, decision trees, how to evaluate risk in real time. By the end of the hour, some looked energized, others overwhelmed. That was fine. They'd figure it out or they wouldn't. After the brief, Santos approached me. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? How do you know when you're making the right call? When there's no clear answer and the pressure's on and people are counting on you?" I looked at her, saw myself 15 years ago asking the same question to an instructor who'd probably felt just as uncertain about the answer. "You don't," I said. "You make the best call you can with what you know, and then you move forward. Second-guessing yourself in the moment gets people killed. Second-guessing yourself afterward is how you learn. But in the moment, you trust your training and you decide." She nodded slowly, processing that. "Can I tell you something else?" I added. "The fact that you're asking that question means you're thinking like a leader. A lot of pilots never get there. They're so focused on being right that they freeze when there's no clear answer. Don't be that pilot." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." She left, and I gathered my materials. Through the window, I could see the flight line, rows of F divided by a -18s, ground crews moving between them, the mountains rising in the distance under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I'd made the right choice coming back here. Not the smart career choice, not the path to higher rank. But the right choice for me. That night, I met Walker for dinner. He'd driven down from Colorado for a reunion. We sat at the same bar where we'd talked 3 years ago, ordered the same food, fell into the same comfortable rhythm. "You seem good," he said after we'd covered the usual topics. "I am. No regrets about leaving command. None. None. I did that job. It was important. But it wasn't me. This is." He smiled. "I told you years ago that the best part of this job is the people you teach. Glad you figured it out. Took me long enough." We finished our drinks and said goodbye in the parking lot. He'd head back to Colorado in the morning, back to his civilian life, his simple job teaching people to fly for fun. I'd head back to base, back to the simulators and briefs and flight line. Different paths, same underlying truth. We'd both found a way to keep doing what we loved without letting it consume us. I drove home through the desert night, windows down, cool air rushing through the car. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment before going inside, looking up at the stars scattered across the sky. Somewhere out there, pilots I'd trained were flying missions, making decisions, leading others. Maybe they remembered what I'd taught them. Maybe they didn't. Either way, I'd done my part. Inside, I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, sat on my couch with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. No paperwork, no urgent emails, no weight of command. Just a quiet evening in a house that finally felt like home. They used to say, real pilots only. Turns out, that's exactly what I was. And I didn't need anyone else's validation to know it anymore. So, I'm curious, have you ever had a moment like this? A moment where someone tried to put you in a box, only for you to blast your way out with your actions? Or maybe a time you had to redefine what success and happiness meant for you. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.